Hi, and welcome to this instance list tutorial. The instance list is accessed via the track name button at the bottom of any instance of Pro-Q 4, and it provides an overview of all the FabFilter EQs, compressors, gates, and de-essers in your project, and gives you immediate access to all the most important mix parameters without having to constantly open and close plugin interfaces. This feature works very well in full screen mode, incidentally, and if you have two displays, park your DAW mixer on the other one. Clearly, this feature is about workflow, so let me start with a word about that. One of the most important mixing tips I ever learnt was work quickly. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't spend ages working on a mix, getting every detail just right. Emphatically not. That's my own personal happy place. It means get the basic essentials in place as quickly as possible. Get it sounding like a record in record time. Then you can relax and enjoy yourself, tweaking all the little details. If you speedrun the initial stages of the mix, you'll make the process more fun, and you'll probably end up with a better mix as well. I think it's safe to say that DAWs are excellent for the final stages of a mix, with the ability to automate anything, or recall the mix on another day with fresher ears so you can fix those couple of things that weren't quite right. But for the early stages of a mix, nothing is as fast as an analog console that gives you immediate access to all your EQs and dynamics at once. Until now, anyway. This is what the instance list aims to address, giving you access to all your most important mix parameters in one place. You can zoom it out with your mouse wheel or with the slider at the top and get an overview of the mix. Then you can click on an instance to enlarge that channel to see more detail, and click away to shrink it again. Alternatively, you can auto-zoom with the button at the top. Now channels enlarge themselves when you mouse over them, and you can shuffle through channels like a deck of cards. This is cool, but personally I prefer to enlarge them manually when I need to. You'll notice that the interface for each instance doesn't simply shrink down, rather the controls get simpler, with only the most essential parameters visible at the smallest zoom level. The gate and the de-esser show only threshold and a gain reduction meter. The compressor adds a makeup gain knob and an auto gain button as well, while the EQs just show a spectrum display. Note that whatever zoom level you're at, some extra options appear when you hover your mouse over an instance. A power button at the top left corner allows you to bypass that instance. Or there's a drop-down menu over to the right with a preset browser. If it's an EQ, this menu also contains the EQ Match feature, which we can use right here in the instance list. This is the rhythm guitar right channel. I'll choose rhythm guitar left for the reference. We should probably let it analyze for a bit longer, but this will do. Let's have 8 bands. And if I expand the track, there's my matched setting. Of course, I don't actually want my left and right guitars to sound the same, but fortunately there's now an undo option under the power button. And if you press that, it will be joined by a redo as well. If you hold Control or Command and mouse wheel in a few clicks. Now the dynamics modules have little level meters as well, and they gain a range control for the de-esser, both ratio and range for the gate, while the compressor gains a ratio and an auto threshold button. And the EQs show their EQ curve as well as the spectrum. There's a couple of important extra options now available when you mouse over an instance. The bottom right corner now has a gain section, which depends slightly on which type of plugin it's in. Pro DS gives us input and output gain controls, with the pan rings around them as usual. A quick general tip: hold Alt while tweaking either of those, and the other one will move an equal and opposite amount, giving you a quick and easy way to adjust the gain structure through any FabFilter plugin. Like the gate, which is exactly the same. The compressor gain section is also the same, but with an added mix slider at the bottom. This isn't actually a dry-wet mix control for parallel compression. The ability to go higher than 100% wouldn't make sense in that case. Rather, it's an easy way to tame your settings or exaggerate them. Don't worry, you can do parallel compression, we just need to zoom in a bit more first. Before we do, let's look at the EQ gain section. This actually only has one gain knob, on the basis that with a linear EQ it doesn't make any difference if the gain comes before or after. Of course, Pro-Q4 isn't strictly 100% linear anymore, but it's still mostly linear with most settings. We also get to toggle the auto gain feature here and invert the polarity. There's another button at the top, however, which we also find in all the other plugins. This is a really simple, but in my opinion, very thoughtful and helpful feature. It just temporarily boosts the output gain by 6 dB while you hold it. This can help you to answer questions like, am I actually EQing the correct channel? Does this part actually just need to be louder? What details am I currently missing from this part? Which elements of other parts is this part occluding? Usually it will make most sense to do this on the last plugin in the chain, but you could temporarily boost the signal into a compressor to drive that harder. This is a really cool feature that you might miss if you don't know about it. At least I did to begin with. So, zoom in a bit more, and now we see nodes on the EQs, which you can edit in the usual way. Drag them around, or adjust the Q with your mouse wheel. Or you can right-click to access a bunch of other options. Change the stereo placement, or the speaker set if it's a multi-channel mix. The filter type or steepness. Make it spectral or dynamic. In which case, an extra handle appears for that band, so you can control the dynamic behavior. The EQs now offer an EQ sketch button at the bottom left, so you can quickly draw in a frequency response. Granted, this feature might be easier to use with the track expanded fully, but there's now also a button at the top left to do that. The box that appears when you hover the mouse over an EQ node isn't only a readout. You can solo the band here if you want, or you can drag the values up and down in case you want to adjust the gain without affecting the frequency, or vice versa. And of course, you can double-click to type in a number. If you've zoomed all the way in, or expanded the track, you'll have access to almost all the features available from its own interface. You'll only need to open the plugin's actual interface for tweakier stuff like EQing the sidechain of the compressor, or adjusting attack and release for the dynamic EQ behavior. Obviously, all that scaling behavior doesn't happen by accident, which is part of the reason why the FabFilter plugins are being added gradually, one at a time. Currently, these 4 are the only ones available in the list, but more of the FabFilter plugins will be added in future, with the plan being to eventually add all of them, except maybe the synthesizers. Meanwhile, I'm going to share some methods to help optimize your instance list workflow. First of all, let's talk about project management. I'm not a naturally tidy or organized person, so I had to learn the following tip the hard way. Name your tracks. That was a lesson I learned early on, and I'm happy to report I'm pretty good at it now. It's well ingrained that I don't add a track to my project without giving it a useful name. And those names you give your tracks will be picked up by the plugins so you can identify them in the instance list. The track name list to the right can be hidden if you don't want it, but personally I find it very helpful. When there are multiple plugins on the same track, they'll be lined up next to each other in the correct order with the signal running from left to right. Note that if you change the order of plugins on a track, you'll have to stop playback and restart it before the instance list will update. A supplementary tip. It can help to be consistent with your track names. For example, all my guitar channels include the abbreviation GTR in the track name, so it's easy to see them all together by typing GTR into the search field at the top. In fact, you don't even need to click in the search field first. I can just type bus to see all my subgroup channels. Reaper makes it easy to create hierarchies of subgroups. For example, my bass and guitar subgroups are all feeding into the overall backline bus, and they're all feeding the mix bus. But the instance list doesn't need to know about that, because every channel that I consider a bus has that little string in its name. If I type tom instead, we can see that, as well as my raw tom channels, I also have a tom subgroup, mostly so I can compress them all together. Technically this is a bus, but it's not as important as the other ones, so I haven't used bus in the name, and I only see this one when I look for toms. Alternatively, you can choose the quick jump option from the menu to the right. If I type SLO, that will take me to my Soldano lead guitar track. But all other instances remain visible, so I still have the context. You can, if you prefer, set this as the default search option, so when you start to type, the quick jump box appears. Okay, let's talk about track order. I started out as a live engineer, so the standard universal live sound channel order is deeply ingrained into my soul. That's drums first, starting with kick, then bass, guitars, keys, and so on. My only deviation from the standard live sound patch is the subgroups, which now live with their child tracks, because I use folders in Reaper to create those. If you're strictly studio-based, then you can ignore that standard order and create your own, but I do think it's useful to settle on a consistent channel order that you stick to every time. I know that if there are drum tracks in the project, they will always be at the top of the arrange page, and if there are vocals, they will always be at the bottom, which speeds me up greatly. The instance list will reflect whatever channel order you set in your DAW, with the one proviso that this doesn't work in every DAW yet. The host has to make that information available to the plugin, so the FabFilter developers are working with the DAW developers to make that happen. If your DAW doesn't yet support this, you'll see the channels listed alphabetically by their names instead. But here in Reaper, there's no issue, and I can scroll to the top for drums, or the bottom for keys and spot effects, as there are no vocals in this project. In a similar manner, I think all DAWs allow you to change the colour of tracks to help you organise them visually. Unfortunately, not all of them currently provide that information to the plugin. Again, the FabFilter devs are working on making that happen. Also, again though, it works fine in Reaper, with my colour choices automatically mirrored in the instance list. Only one of my usual colour choices comes from my live sound days. Yellow, or gold, is the money channel. When mixing monitors, the money channel was the one most likely to get you fired, which tended to be the lead vocal. So if I had a vocal in this project, it would be yellow. My other colour choices are more arbitrary, although I'm now so used to them that they seem obviously correct. Guitars are red, right? Unless they're lead guitars, in which case it's red plus yellow, so orange. And bass parts are obviously blue. Perhaps your synesthesia disagrees vehemently. That's okay, pick whatever colours make sense to you, but they'll make it easier to identify the correct instances, especially if you have a consistent palette of colours that you always use. You can also pin specific tracks using the pin icon to the left, and then you can quickly toggle between viewing all tracks or just pinned tracks using the button at the top. You can pin multiple tracks at once, or hold Shift to pin a range of tracks at once, or hold Alt to pin just that track exclusively. If you open the preset menu at the right side of each instance, you have the option to pin all tracks with the same colour. Pinned tracks also get a little pin icon in the minimap at the top right, if that is visible. You can even save pinned sets and recall them later on, which might be invaluable when dealing with really huge projects. Okay, last tip. It occurred to me that the bass guitar part is getting slightly buried in this mix. I recruited my old bandmate Sean Elliott to play the part for me, as my bass playing sucks. So I want to make sure you can hear it. So I'm going to press this button that appears just to the left of the track pin icon when you hover over it. I've now set the bass guitar bus as the collision reference. So when I zoom out, I now see glowing red on any instance of Pro-Q4 that might have clashing frequencies that could be masking the bass part. Predictably, the rhythm guitar tracks are lighting up red in the low frequencies. Let's work smarter and deal with them all at once on the subgroup. It's about 80 Hz that's lighting up, which is a frequency that I definitely want the bass to dominate in this mix. So let's try tightening up the low end of the guitars with a high-pass filter. Note that if you have collisions enabled in that instance of Pro-Q4 before you open the instance list, that instance will be the collision reference, unless you override it by choosing a different one. A couple of words of warning, however. Note that I'm setting this filter high enough and steep enough to allow me to hear the bass more effortlessly, not high and steep enough to make the red go away. Your ears should always be the final arbiter. And as with all analysis tools, you should only use them to locate problems that your ears have already identified, like the indistinct bass in this case. Don't go carving out frequencies that show up red if you can't hear a problem. And of course, remember that the instance list is not aware of all your routing. When I reduce the red clashing frequencies on the guitar bus, the individual guitar channels are going to remain an angry red, because they don't know that I'm attenuating those frequencies downstream. Also, the backline bus is lighting up red because the bass bus is feeding into it, so it's showing the bass colliding with itself. We don't need to worry about that either. Okay, that's all for now. Don't forget the user manual is available via the help menu. Thanks for watching.